From Geppetto Studios in New Freedom, Pennsylvania, welcome to the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, your home for inclusive, positive geek culture, where we talk about movies, comics, music, books, and whatever else we feel like. Please welcome your host. Ah, yes, he does it all for the podcast groupies, Brad Mendenhall.
Hey kids, it is episode 293 of the Cosmic Geppetto Podcast, another mini episode, and I'm going to do something that the 8-year plus history of this show I don't think I've ever done. I'm going to do a book review, because I want to say 6 to 9 months ago they did a joke on SNL Weekend Update saying that John Grisham was putting out a sequel to his novel The Firm, which was eventually turned into a movie with Tom Cruise. And the joke was like, this news brought to you by your dad, because John Grisham is definitely this sort of writer that middle-aged dads love. Now, sadly, I am a middle-aged dad. I was in college when The Firm came out, at least when the movie came out. And John Grisham was massive at that time. Each of his books sold like gangbusters. It seemed like every year a new movie came out based on one of his novels, and they were a big deal. You had The Firm, and that was Tom Cruise. Interesting time in Tom Cruise's career where he was not an action star. It really wasn't until I don't even think the first Top Gun was not an action movie, in that he didn't go around beating people up. Even the first Mission Impossible movie was a weird action film, because if you watch that, Tom Cruise didn't duke it out with the bad guys. If you watch that movie, he kicked one person, and that was pretty much the only fight he had. Everything else was sort of adventure, escaping, and espionage stuff. It's very telling that the opening scene of the first Mission Impossible wasn't about some daring do. It was about them tricking an opponent into thinking someone was dead and giving up secrets. And it actually makes sense, because Tom Cruise, a good actor, but not a man of smaller stature, wasn't a tall, intimidating presence. He wasn't Arnold Schwarzenegger. He wasn't Sylvester Stallone. While certainly fit, but he was, it was more about him being good looking and being a solid dramatic actor and having charisma, and then people wanting to see him on screen get the girl. All of his early movies, really, with a few exceptions, Legend, but that was before, Legend was before he was Tom Cruise, really, was about him, being charming and getting the girl and screwing it up and then still getting the girl. The Firm was a thriller. And it's funny because this guy who's had 7, 8 Mission Impossible movies, and a bunch of them being action films where he's beating up, his big action scene was beating Wilford Brimley, the Quaker Oats guy, with a briefcase. Things have changed. He's no longer beating up the guy from Cocoon. But that changed eventually. John Grisham being a blockbuster writer. He is still a very successful writer, but it's now unusual for them to turn his work into a different property. TV. I know there was a Firm TV show that lasted 1 year with Josh Lucas as the star that didn't catch on. And he has gone back to his previous characters a couple times. Jake Briggins, who was the star of his first novel, A Time to Kill, which was eventually turned into a movie with Matthew McConaughey. He's brought that character back for 2 more novels. And this is the second. Mitch McDear, that's the character from The Firm. And he brought Mitch back for a novel called The Exchange. And it was at Walmart in their book section. And I figured I'd grab it because it was like $20 for a hardcover. I figured I would get it and give it to my parents because I'm seeing them, but I would read it. And I haven't read a John Grisham book in a long time, and I used to read his stuff pretty regularly. It was sort of almost hard to avoid Grisham's work, and it was very popular. And back then, in the 90s, he wasn't just popular with dads. He was just a popular writer of legal thrillers. But I haven't read him for a while because there seemed to be a pretty big lack of conflict in his books. He would have, they definitely weren't legal thrillers. They were just sort of legal books. And often what would happen, I noticed in a couple of his books, what would happen is they would set something up where two groups were on opposing sides of an issue. You'd have a lawyer who was a bit of a bit too perfect and a bit too nice, and obviously it was a case of John Grisham writing himself into a book, except for the person would be, younger, better looking. Seeing as every writer has at least an instinct to do. And they would get thrown into it. There would be a lot of talk about, it's a shame everyone can't be reasonable. It's like, there's a way to be reasonable. And then at the end, everyone would just be reasonable. And at the end, it's like, they were fighting over a lot of money. Turns out there's enough money for everyone to split and everyone be happy. That was the ending to several of his books that I remember reading 10 years ago. Just everything sort of ended up okay. It was a lot of there's a story construct or device called idiot plot, where the only way the plot can move forward is if the main character or the main characters just act like an idiot and do stuff against their own best interest. John Grisham uses this quite a bit. The best example I could think of is the book Pelican Brief, which was turned into a movie with Julia Roberts and Denzel Washington. And Julia Roberts' character is on the run, and she is presented as a very smart, very savvy, very aware law student at a prestigious university, and she isn't smart enough to figure out that she should pay with cash instead of her credit card, because every time she uses her credit card to stay at a hotel, that she ends up being, almost nabbed 2 pages later. And it's like, well, yeah, dummy, use cash. And idiot plot would come in where everyone was being so dumb and greedy and costing themselves, and then at the end everyone would be like, well, maybe I should actually be just a little nicer or agree to a reasonable compromise, and then everything would be fine. It's not fair to get too far into John Grisham's mind, but it seems like he's almost adverse to conflict in his quote-unquote legal thrillers. And reading The Exchange, it's sort of, I got a little bit of that vibe. So what I'll say about The Exchange is, first off, John Grisham is still a very readable author. By meaning, it was a 330-page book, and I burned through it in 3 days. He uses a very, his writing style is very propulsive, and he's always, in pop culture writers or pop fiction writers like him, like Dan Brown, who did the Da Vinci Code, like Anne Rice, J.K. Rowling. Often they have a writing style where it's not the deepest, it's not the most complex, it's not the most challenging reading, but boy, you burn through a chapter in a heartbeat, and that is very valuable. So Grisham still has that. He's still just a very readable author, and does keep you reading. So you cannot take that away from him. But the plot, but just a lack of compelling drama. And the plot is that Mitch and his wife, who at the end were sort of escaped from the mob and were on the run, but had money and looked like they were going to live a happy life on the lam. And they very quickly in the first 50 pages said, no, they were on the lam for a little while. They lived in Europe and learned to speak Italian, and then decided that they were going to come back to society. And he became a lawyer and a partner at a high-powered law firm. And it took place 15 years after the first novel, so it was the early 2000s, and they're dealing with a situation in Libya where he was representing a group and took on an assistant, another lawyer as basically his assistant, Giovanna, who we meet her briefly. As is often the case with any female character in a John Grisham, she's young, she's beautiful, she's very smart and charming. We meet her, she basically has dinner with Mitch, the main character, and then is immediately kidnapped by terrorists in Libya. And the rest of the book is everyone trying to figure out how to get her back. But it's not an action novel, and it's just weird negotiations that kind of pull Mitch and his wife into it. So you are wondering if they're going to rescue a character that you only had 2 or 3 pages to become invested in, and you know her father, who was an older man who is rich and might be dying of cancer, who is friends with Mitch. So it was a thing where, why do we care about this woman? Because we're told on one page that she's pretty and she's charming. We don't really, when she's being held prisoner, we only get a few pages here or there describing her situation, so it's not enough to feel like we're experiencing what she's going through. Mitch and his wife want her to be rescued, but Mitch, again, had one dinner with her, and his wife never met her. So how invested are they? And there isn't, the terrorists who kidnapped her, they have very little communication. So it's not even that there's like real tense negotiations. We finally have a little bit of negotiation and back and forth towards the end, but by that point you're 3/4 through the book. It's a little late to have that. So it just ended up, she was kidnapped. There's a ransom. It's a really big ransom. They try to pull the money together, and there you go. I will admit that when you got to the final scene, I was wondering, it's like, oh my God, are they going to get her back? And there was a little bit of a red herring at the end, but it ended up getting wrapped up pretty neatly. There just wasn't a whole lot of story there. It felt like it could have been, it was funny, it was very readable. I got through it in 3 days, but I also felt like this probably could have been a 30-page short story. The characters are too thin. You weren't particularly interested in the inner lives of these characters. They were just thin characters, and they all had one or two attributes, and then you moved on. I definitely won't say it was a bad book, because it wasn't a bad book. It was any book that you burn through in 3 days and you're interested at the end of how it ends, that's a win. But John Grisham, it's almost like he ran out of good plot lines or compelling adventures to put his characters through. And, he's now just putting out very readable, sort of disposable pop fiction. There's certainly worse things to do. And he's going back to characters that people liked, but you realize, did we like the characters? Did we like the firm because we thought Mitch McDear was such a great character? Or did we like the firm because it was a compelling conceit where he's brought into a high-power law firm, and it turns out they're all bad, and he has to figure his way out of it, and how does he get out of it? Because that's a compelling thing for people to read, where we all imagine having a job where they give us a BMW and a big paycheck, and you're part of this, brought into this great world, and then it turns out it's bad, and that's an interesting way to go. But it wasn't because Mitch was such a great character. He wasn't. He was just the same as every other male lead in Grisham work, where sort of a flat character who just gets put into stuff. So yeah, I read it. Reading The Exchange, it reminded me what you could like about John Grisham work, where he has this great breezy narrative style. And also why, after you've read a couple of John Grisham novels, you've sort of read all the John Grisham novels. And again, there's certainly worse things to be. And I think writers people interested in getting work published would do very well to read his work and understand what he brings, where he doesn't bog down the reader. He doesn't slow down the reader. He presents this really good story. He presents this story in a very digestible way. And, I think there's some young writers could learn from that. It's like, don't bog everything down with pages on pages of description of every doorknob and every cufflink, and so then you lose narrative momentum. He's successful for a reason, but I have no plans on buying the next Grisham book or going back and finding all the ones that haven't picked up. So that was, worst ways to spend my days. I did see when I was at the bookstore last time, there was a book I didn't even know came out. I haven't been reading as much the last couple of years as I would like. One of my favorite authors, Christopher Buckley, wrote a book make something great again. And it was he writes very funny political novels. This one takes place during the presidency of Donald Trump, and it was for sale. I didn't pick it up then, but I'm going to pick it up next time because I think Chris Buckley is great. He's very smart, very cutting, very funny, but also has a breezy style. So, I definitely owe Mr. Grisham thank you, if anything, because he got me back into a bookstore and got me thinking about how much I like reading, and I haven't been doing enough of it. All right, kids, well, this has been a lot of fun. Until next time, as Jarf likes to say,
see you in the funny pages.
Subscribe to the Cosmic Geppetto podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or wherever quality podcasts can be found. Rate and review us while there. Follow us on Twitter at CosmicGPod, and we will follow you back. Unless you're a jerk. We don't follow jerks. Like us on Facebook at facebook.com/Cosmic Geppetto. We love hearing your ideas for upcoming episodes. Email us at cosmicgeppetto@comcast.net. You maniacs! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God, damn you all to hell!